Another chapter of The Godly Laughter by Claes Jansens, a book in existential psychology, and one of the tough chapters because he dwell on really many topics, taking into account that we are between death, freedom, meaninglessness, and loneliness. So I've chosen these four taken from Irvin Yalom, and he quotes Irvin Yalom for looking out of these four perspectives. And death gives you the opposite pole of meaningless, and the freedom is in the opposite pole of the loneliness, because when you are free, you can also be free to be lonely, or the loneliness is bound to your freedom to choose and do. And so I'm gonna look into this chapter and comment on it as good as I can, even though it's a bit tough to make any qualified and fulfilling talk about it. And let me start with a case he had talked to. It was a lady who felt she was stuck in the adolescence, and she couldn't get over it to become the new she wanted to be. At the same time, she wanted to be at union with a kind of a white knight or a savior, but at the same time, she was very terrified of that same wish that she has. So she really liked to find someone and to cling to them, but at the same time the idea of opposing them and not wanting them. She was a revolutionary at the same time. She wanted to be close and near, but she ran away at the same time. So she needed help and she was lost. And from the last chapter, we had introduced his four ways of handling this, the circle, as I call it. He called it something else, of being satisfied, and then you get out into a kind of censorship, and later you can get confused, and that confusion can lead you to a new insight and inspiration that brings you a new situation of satisfaction. And it's clearly that many people are out somewhere where they cannot find that, and that's what this chapter is talking about, or trying to encapsulate. So between death and meaninglessness, freedom and loneliness is the ultimate concerns of our human life, says Irvin Yalom. They might not be such for everyone, but anyone can remind himself or her of the experience of being in touch with these four realities, even though we not always know that it is what we are in touch with. So what are they? And let's talk about freedom as it was in the book's beginning, the freedom to choose, and angst and fear that can be combined to that responsibility that is in it, because you cannot run away from it. So you can choose not to be free, or you can choose to submit to somebody else's will, so you can get a bypass out of it. But if you're going to take your freedom seriously, then you have to look into what it is. And here it's defined like something to cling to is lost. You have nothing to cling to. You are free to go with yourself, in yourself, and with your world around you in any kind of direction you want. Already here, it sounds very crazy and unrealistic, because who of us have experienced that truly? So what do they mean by that? And is it really possible? So many people are born and live and die in the same culture and place, and they do not feel that they could go in any direction. It's like they have already a direction they are pointed to and affected by, and that's what what concerns them in their life, and that's what becomes their choice. So how is it that freedom in its ultimate meaning is you have nothing to cling to? There is a nothingness, an empty space, no direction, no limits. And you will make that direction and limit. It means that if you are given the possibility from the world around you and are secured your true freedom, that is what you will be able to do. And it means that some people, despite all these limits, this is of course all my explanation, not to be put on the altar in any way, and it is a read into the book and not an explanation or reciting of it all the way. So if you are limited by the society, at the same time can find ways to fulfill yourself and your I, the inner self of you, and your freedom, that means that you actually can do it and change it. And that's what satisfaction is all about, all the change that leads you to confusion and then a new satisfaction, a new inspiration. The other part of this four-sided look into who we are is the loneliness, and that means being cut off from others. It does not mean that you are isolated from yourself or from other persons in the way that we understand loneliness, like isolation in a kind of a cell in prison, or being put somewhere all alone so you cannot come in contact with others. It means something deeper than that. It means you are alone with yourself at all times, even though you can get in touch with others and live among them and use a lot of time between them. You are still alone with yourself, and that's what brings you to understand your true existence in life. No matter what and how you do things, you have this oneness with yourself. You are so alone in being cut off from others. You are your own island, your own Robinson Crusoe, and that's what defines you very, very deeply and into the core. And some people realize that through living. At one point they get this aha experience I've been mentioning several times in this talk, in these videos, that you suddenly realize that no matter how much people are around you, or you are in contact with a lot of things that makes you not being lonely, you can at the same time feel strange and have this feeling of being unreal or not present in where you are. And maybe you can get this experience of your total loneliness in the universe, no matter how much and how many people are around you. And that's a very strange thing, that humans can do that, even in the most crowded places, even though we usually do not, because we are so occupied where there are crowds, and we can be very much turned into, like, attention-wise outwards and not really reflecting on our loneliness in those occasions. We tend to forget them, but it doesn't make them disappear. So your existential condition, your existential ground, the thing you are in, is based on one side, the freedom you have, and then the loneliness that you are in that freedom to go or not to go. So you are also responsible for a choice that you can give away or keep to yourself. But no matter what you do, you are forced to act. You are forced to do something with your life. And that force is risky. And that's what brings you into fear and uncertainty, because at one point you'll start realizing that you can make a choice, and that choice can be totally wrong. So should you not choose? And by choosing, you are limiting other possibilities. It's like if you want to choose to buy something or relate to someone or get into a marriage or relation with a person. And you know, by doing that, you're limiting all other possibilities. And you're choosing to put your decision into limitation. And it can have been better not doing so. So that brings also a kind of uncertainty and fear with it. that you know you are bound to choose. You are destined to choose. You cannot let go of it. That's what Sartre said. You are destined to freedom. And that's the meaning of it, that you cannot not choose. But some people manage in some ways not to choose. And he mentioned here a very famous Danish king, Christian II, who has been like losing his battles and at one point leaving Jutland to go to the little island of Fyn. And he kept sailing forth and back in between the two shores every time he saw light on one side. He remembered that he could be harbored but lose his kingdom, and then he turned around. And when he came close to the original place of his kingdom, based in Jutland, and he could see that, well, the risk of going back there and losing it all is too big, so he turned around to safety once more. And so he kept being in doubt and never really realizing the risk he has to take. It needs courage and a kind of calmness, that you know you are choosing and the risk is there. But what is there if you do not choose? And that's why he here tries to quote Søren Kierkegaard, that it is dangerous to dare. And why is it? Because you can lose. And by daring, you can lose, which is what you have dared to do. And thereby, you are losing part of yourself. But you are losing more by not choosing to dare, because if you choose to dare and fail, well, life will help you with its punishment. I don't understand what that means, but it's like life will give you like the results or consequences. But if you haven't dared from the beginning, well, who's there to give you the consequences in any way? You are stuck. You're not even living. So you can choose to dare and lose, and you can choose to freeze and thereby lose yourself and keep stuck in that driving forward and backward like that king who never could make the decision. So whenever you dare do something, you are in a way creating that path in your freedom that is chosen. He's not really talking about destiny here, but it sounds like it. It's like your destiny you're creating, and at the same time, you do not really know the output of it. And then how can you accept it on both sides? But what you can accept is that you have chosen to dare to do something that you saw was right, and you looked into and found possible and important, or maybe a leap of faith in your own life. And that's a lot better than staying stuck where you are, because by taking that leap of faith, you are already knowing the end and the consequence, whether it was tragic and fatal and had these punishing consequences, or it brings you to that hidden paradise behind it. And mostly that's what happens. That's my opinion anyway, that you actually get to the new haven, the nice place you wanted, by taking that risk. But even if you fail, you will always look back and say, I was brave enough to take the risk and to dare do something that I saw a lot of potential in. By not doing so, you fall into a kind of depression, and you will get stuck in that confusion and self-censor that he talked about in the early chapter. By self-censoring your choices and just giving yourself up to how things are around you, you're actually preventing the fulfillment of yourself, that peak experience of happiness and joy and fulfillment of life that is meant for you as a human. And then he talks about death and the experience of being alive leading to death. there is the only two certainties that you really know in this world. That is, you've come here, and at one point you're gonna leave it. There is something called death. That means you're gonna leave. And that brings many people in a kind of unreal feeling of life. It becomes meaningless, or it can tend to become a kind of unreal feeling of living. It becomes scary to see the reality, because what is it then? If you cannot get rid of the fear of death, then life itself becomes without meaning, because you are stuck in looking into the death you're going to meet at one point. So what's the point of doing everything in between? But we must learn and know that life itself is what entices and brings about that fear of death. So because we are alive and trying to live and do something with our lives, in it itself, death becomes the opposite thing, becomes the goal, and the target becomes the thing that brings you out of everything that's alive and gives it meaning at the same time. That's exactly why life becomes precious and deep and understandable, because it's limited and because there is an end to it. So that's why it's important to live it fully and try to choose your freedom and yourself and your inner fulfillment, and to get to that kind of inspirational satisfaction. But people who keep stuck, says the author here, are afraid of life, and that fear is like the fear of death for them. So afraid of living, it's like afraid of losing connections, the place you are in, the satisfaction you think you have. And that is the same as fearing death. So these two are connected, and they bring people into a kind of realization of depression. You become neurotic, so you try to avoid anything that can bring you really fully to life, or maybe bring you in the risk of death. You become someone who are not really living and not really dead. And so what is your existence? You have no intensity in it and no meaning of it. And the contrast of that are those people who really go for life as if it's gonna end tomorrow, and they dare take the risks and live it fully. That doesn't mean you have to be crazy and drive the car 400 kilometers, 300, 400 kilometers on the long road just because you want to feel it, but you do it. You dare do it, and you dare feel that intensity and the feeling of being unreal in that car, in that moment where everything floats and nothing stays stable. It's like you have left reality for a second or two or 10. And then if you are still aware of slowing down after that, nothing comes in your way and tipples the car and brings you out of life, then you are back. And if you're back from that experience, that means you have learned how to live intensively and fully. Same can be said about the brave hero or the soldier. And all these are my examples, not from the book. And so we are stuck between the thoughts of death and the fear of it, and the fear of life. And the only thing we can do in that is to try and live fully. And to do that, we have to go from being part of the fusion of the whole to the individual that Jung called the individuation process. So you leave that fusion you are part of, the whole, the mass, the culture, the society, the world around you, and everything that tells you who you are, what you are, and you go and start being that very special and unique part of yourself. And again, not in that neurotic or megalomanian way that you become a sick version of your realization, and you become too huge and too big to yourself, so you cannot walk on earth anymore. That's not it. but it's like we saw with the car driver, fulfilling your inner intense feeling of life. That can be in many ways, less dramatic as well. Doesn't need to be dramatic to be fulfilling, but it means you have to dare something. If you want, like, to find the love you like, you have to dare try and maybe fail. But if you never do, you will never know, and that's where it comes from. So that individuation is to step forward and to confirm your originality, your specialness, and it has the costs of being scary, because you can end up alone and you can end up unprotected and in a situation that you weren't in before. But if you don't go with the individuation, well, you stay in that connection, to that fusion. You give yourself up to another, or to society, or to your surroundings, and that will never bring you that fulfillment. That's why you become the gray man. You become the boring lady, the stiff person who have never known how it is to live on his own, always part of everything else, and nothing is new or risky. So he ends up talking about the last part of these four connected things. That's meaninglessness. Sorry, and that is connected to death and connected to the fear and the freedom all at once. And not finding the meaning, or losing sight of the meaning, or living in a feeling of meaninglessness is a well-known phenomena for many people. And here it is explained like, how I understand it, as losing the will to be and to create and to live fully. It's like if you are hit by disappointment of a kind and you freeze. Because mostly when we are engaged and we are driven by our will to do or create, that gives us meaning, even though that meaning is temporarily and maybe not fulfilling totally. But then we are in something that we want, and we want to see in front of our eyes. Whatever we are engaged in can give us that meaning. And here they say it as if it is like that, but I don't think that's always true. Sometimes we can be engaged in something, but that doesn't fulfill the meaning that we need. And so we lose sight of the meaning and it becomes meaningless. There are a lot of people who do a lot of things, but they do not find the meaning in them, and they can express meaninglessness through that work. And while they're doing it, it happens for many kind of people, especially known by artists and people who are trying to get through with a kind of goal they have, a vision. Sometimes they can feel it's meaningless, or they do not find themselves in that work, and it becomes without any reason, and it doesn't matter, as they say. So the psychology of existence does not give meaning ahead, and that's a questionable question. It's a discussion that they will be facing with philosophies in life that means that says that meaning is given, and there is an ontological meaning, that means a truth outside ourselves, higher and existing out there. It goes all the way back to Plato and Socrates and others, but it doesn't mean at the same time that everything is given in a meaning. You can be living the meaning you create and the meaning you put in things, so that can also be true. And so beside we are forced to live our freedom, we are also in a way always facing the creation of meaning in what we want to achieve. Our will to get to something is what brings the meaning along with it. And in that moment, everything that seems meaningless becomes full of meaning, And even though you know that it will end and it's not gonna last, or it's just for that time you have. And so when we get disappointed by something, he's here quoting Freud, that if we are hit by some kind of disappointment and we have to live it through in our feelings, then we get frustrated without understanding that feeling and not doing something new to get over it. So it's again the meaning in doing and using your freedom and your will to become that new person and reach that new satisfaction. As he say it here, he uses a quote by Camus. It's to cherish one's nights of despair. So even if you are in some kind of despair and you feel things are not happy at all, if you can cherish that, that means you found a meaning in it, even though it is how it is. It's like saying, well, the pain has a meaning and the suffering is good, or it can be useful. It has a meaning to it. Life is suffering, so accept it as it is, as Schopenhauer most likely would have said. And so to combine these four elements of death, meaninglessness, freedom, and loneliness, it is like to be in the circle of existence within yourself and with yourself. And the one who learns to live alone with himself, to be lonely, can love with a kind of selfishness, unselfishness. So if you can live lonely and you can live with that in love for yourself and with the meaning in it, so you choose your loneliness, not because you have to, but if you choose that you are that lonely person in the universe and you are always alone with yourself, even though you are connected and have people around you and have your love of your life, if you can live with that and accept it deeply inside you, that will give you the ability to love somebody for who they are. Selfishness will disappear. It's like you will be unselfish in that love. You will be authentic in your contact because you are authentic in your contact with yourself. So it all begins with that understanding and living with whom you are. And here they talk, he uses the voices of different psychologists, Irvin Yalom primarily, but also a bit of Freud and Martin Buber, all known psychologists from that period and from that school, Otto Rank and a little bit Kierkegaard, as said. He uses their voice, Eric Fromm, Abraham Maslow, he uses their voices to say that while you are between these four elements, you are also in relation. There is the I and you that always surrounds you, and that I and you can also be the I and it, because it depends on how you look at yourself and others and how much you are attached to yourself. You can get attached to others and understand their inner world. And so it is called the mature love, not the symbiotic love that wants to control or submit its control to the other. It's not that kind of just getting out of your loneliness and finding the meaning in such kind of relation that is sadistic or masochistic and in the end sadomasochistic. It's because it's two persons in relation or more. But it is the kind of love that is mature enough to be in itself and at the same time for the other. I think I got through some way and somehow in explaining. There are some loose ends I will mention here in the end that he has been talking about. And one of them is that idea of being special, because your loneliness can bring you to that position that, well, I'm lonely because I'm special. you have always to remember that your loneliness and your specialness is not meant as you being better in opposition to everyone else. And what does that mean? It's not so well explained here, but it has a deep and very important meaning, so we do not fall into that sickness of narcissism and just wanting ourselves because we cannot otherwise, and then we become sick with ourselves and our importance and our special being. And that's also a trait in our time today, I guess, that many people can be the gray in the mass. They do not want to stick out or find themselves truly. They are afraid of that. But it seems there are just as many who are praising themselves all the way to narcissism and seeing themselves as the only thing that really matters. And that's not individuation, and that's not getting forward with your originality. It's a sick way of being, but being in opposition to everyone else. That's what he said, and that's a word he's taking from Yalom, that it can be a sign of narcissism to feel yourself special in opposition to everyone else. It's like you are something totally different, and if you feel that, then you are somehow out of the lane of the fulfillment you really need. The other thing is that he's talking about, that I need to mention here, it's the unconscious. That in all this, there is what Freud started calling the unconscious and has been taken up from there. The meeting with our unconscious have been also explained, especially by Jung, who is quoted here, and I couldn't make it fit in those four, but it's like deep inside it, because in all what we are doing there is something that also calls us from the unconscious. And he explained it as a river that is floating with a voice from the inside that you can't really stop. It is there and it affects your decision in a way that you are not really always positively aware of. And later they have made the distinction that it's not the unconscious, it's the subconscious. And so there are three layers. There's the conscious, the subconscious, that can provide you with decisions you are not really understanding. Why did that come up? Why did I go in that direction? What forced me? And you know something inside you drove you to that. And then there is the total unconscious, that which you are not aware of. You have buried and locked down and have isolated yourself from, and needs to be taken out and reconnected with your inner self. That's how I see it in my head anyway. And that unconscious is important to take into consideration, because it will also affect who we are. And because human are lived by this unconscious, it has a will of its own, and that's why it needs to be connected somehow with all this. Don't ask me how, and the book is not explaining how, but it's just giving us some insights in what to do with this. Then he also says that if you have conscience wishes, if you have some will that you are conscious about, sometimes your unconscious can have another wish or will. As they say, the heart has the reasons that the head does not understand. And it's like listening to your inner impulse or your inner feeling or sixth sense in a way. It's like everything that forms you from inside that sometimes make you choose something or really want something, even though your head is against it. And so sometimes there can be some part of us that wants something that doesn't seem logic or reasonable in the way it seems. And then he also, during this difficult chapter, touches upon psychosis, and not really digging into deep in that at all, but just mentioning it, that that you can sometimes during these processes can have the risk of ending up in some kind of psychosis. And what is that? That is that you lose the contact with reality. A person loses contact with reality and loses the ability to differ what's you and what's outside you, what's from you and what's from the others. And the other side of psychosis is a fragmentation of personality. Things fall apart. You cannot hold yourself together. You become more than one thing that's not attached and not working together. It's like a kind of inner anarchy inside you and inside your identity. And so psychosis can be a danger on that way of working with these issues with yourself. But he says it's not likely that just because you feel you lose a little bit touch with the reality for some time, or you feel unreal, that's because you have a psychosis, because that state is more permanent, and you get really confused about everything all the time, and you cannot find the direction again. And so you lose total control of that freedom you're trying to fulfill, or the way of life. And so basically this chapter is about two issues. One is the people who are pendling. This is a phrase from Jansen, a pendling between relations, themselves and others, fulfilling or not, the fear of life, fear of death, the king who couldn't land on the one shore, afraid of one thing, and never landed on the other because he was afraid of something else. And so you keep stuck there in between, never fulfilling anything that's existentially important to go through. And the second thing this chapter is about is to have these four core words, core meanings around you, because they are there all the time for everyone who's going through life. And that's what I mentioned in the beginning, the death and the meaninglessness and the freedom and the loneliness, which Irvin Yalom explains in length in his book, Existential Psychotherapy. And unfortunately, I don't have that book with me. It's far, far away. But if I can get hold on it, or a copy, I had made many notes in it. I would like to go through some of it, because he has many cases and many quotes, and he focuses also on the therapeutical side, what to do about it. And to end up everything here, it's like you are in this world, you have been destined to be free to choose, and that brings a responsibility upon you. And you can choose wrong or right, and that brings the fear and angst of choosing, because you're not sure, there is uncertainty. And in the whole process, you have always to look into how you can be authentic to yourself despite the surroundings that maybe not always helping you to that, and how you can break free of the fusion and become on the path of individuation. And a very strong quote here that I maybe might use later is, and I don't know really how it relates to all this, but it's from Schopenhauer, that you have to imagine the world as a place like it is a hell, where people on one side are the suffering and the other side are the devils. So, and that's the people stuck in between all these issues. They cannot accept death, and the fear of death makes them not living, because they cannot just live in the moment and fulfill themselves. It becomes meaningless, and the freedom is too scary. So they get stuck, and they cannot face the loneliness they are really carrying with them. So it becomes a personal hell to go through life, and this hell can get people, as he says here in a beautiful world, to climb down to the unreality of reality. So you climb down from reality instead of becoming very understanding of this reality and fulfilling it. You climb down from it to a level of unreality.